Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to session 2 of the Symbiosis conference. My name is Jack Matthews, and I'll be providing technical support today live from the Oxford University Museum of Natural History. Just a quick reminder about how this webinar jam system works. If you're having any connection issues at any point, please do click the reconnect button at the top of the page, and that will solve most connection issues to our servers. Now, we're going to be hearing from a number of speakers today. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat on the right-hand side. And if you could mark them as questions by clicking the small circle to the right, and the chair of the session will try and pick up as many of those as possible at the discussion at the end and put as many of those as we can to the speakers. And a final reminder that there are, of course, a number of sessions comprising this conference. You will need to register separately for them all. I'll put a link up in the chat. We have 2 more sessions after this one today, and then a final 5th session on Friday. So do remember to register for all of those. And at that point, I'm going to hand over to today's chair, Will.
Thank you very much, Jack, and thank you to the Oxford University Natural History Museum and to you for all your technical support with this event and for hosting us. My name is Will Tattersdill, and I'm a senior lecturer in popular literature, liberal arts and natural sciences at the University of Birmingham. And it's my pleasure to introduce this panel. We've got 3 presentations, very short ones, and then moving into a discussion about imagining or reimagining Neanderthals in art and in culture. Our first speaker is Dr. Rebecca Wragg Sykes, who is honorary fellow at the University of Liverpool and chercheur bénévole Université Bordeaux. She's an archaeologist who has spent 15 years studying Neanderthals. Her research has included stone tools and landscape occupation, as well as the cognitive implications of the first synthetic material, birch, tar. And she's the best-selling author of Kindred, Neanderthal Life, Love, Death, and Art, which has just come out and which we're all very excited about. Becky, I'm gonna hand over to you.
Am I there? Yes, I'm here. Okay, I'm starting my timer because we all have to stay on time today. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and I hope this is a good opening for the session. So what I want to do basically is just very quickly give us a whistle-stop tour of how we have envisioned Neanderthals. Right, so how did we get from the very first ever sketch of a Neanderthal on the left there? That comes from 1864 by Thomas Huxley, and he sketched this during a scholarly meeting and called it Pillars of Hercules Man, based on the Gibraltar skull, which in fact turned out to be a woman. That looks quite simian, sort of very apey face, even got a little tail suggested and very long feet. Versus this image down on the bottom right, which is a very recent work by Tom Björklund, who we're going to hear more about in another of the talks. And I absolutely love this image. I think it encapsulates so much of 21st century ideas about Neanderthals. So how did we get from one to the other? So this is the first scientific, really, sort of view of the Neanderthals. This was the original Feldhofer discovery, the skull cap from Germany, which was found in 1856, but not actually really published till a few years later, and then translated into English. And really, it's the one at the top there. You know, it's just the skull cap. There's not a lot to go on. And although they then had the next, by 1864, they had realized that this other find from Gibraltar was probably from the same population, and that had an entire face. So by that point, they put the 2 together, and really they start to go off and imagine what Neanderthals are like. But we have to remember that something that really set all of this off was this idea that the world Neanderthals lived in was an Arctic world full of bears and reindeer and things. They knew that there were some hippos around during the warmer interglacial periods, but they didn't understand the depth of time or how it all meshed together. So this is partly what explains some of the details in the pictures. And this is a very early, this is what was a conjectured pithecanthropus. So this is like a real ape human. I think what people were perceiving as before even Neanderthals. But this is interesting because it's walking completely upright, has furs, tools. So early on, ideas about what Neanderthals and their contemporaries or their ancestors might have been like were actually pretty varied. These are some of the earliest Neanderthal specific reconstructions. The one on the left is looking, pretty aggressive, but the one on the top right is quite interesting. That was published in Harper's Bazaar, which called itself the Journal of Civilization in 1873. You can see that there is actually a hafted tool in that hand, and there's a dog accompanying them as well. So pretty human-like in many ways. And some of the early sort of attempts to represent this is in the 1880s, 1870s. They actually tried to bring the archaeology in. This is a Neanderthal fighting a bear, but they have tried to kind of base this on the Feldhofer discovery, which is the context of those Neanderthal bones that came out of that first German site. There were bear bones mixed in, and I think this is, they're trying to represent this with the bones right down there on the ground too. And what's interesting is some of the early artists that were working on these illustrations, which were within very popular pop science books of the time, were the same artists who were working on very famous, what have become visually famous now, so Cosette there in the middle from Les Miserables, and also artists who were working with Jules Verne on a journey to the centre of the earth and from the earth to the moon, these science fiction sort of imaginings of the world. So there's a real sort of linking there in terms of culture and science and how all this begins to mesh together. When you get to the early 20th century, it's interesting, it's fascinating that you have such really conflicting ideas about Neanderthals, and it's reflecting debates that were going on in the scholarly world too. You have a very ape-like sort of presentation. These were done 1 year apart, by the way, in the sort of 1910-11. The reconstruction there on the left, they already knew by that point that their feet didn't look anything like that. So it's very interesting that it's being presented in such an ape-like, very aggressive looking. The one on the right, completely different, domestic. It's got a necklace, completely different visions. And at the same time, we need to remember that going on with these other images, that some of which were based in the archaeology, some of which were reflecting debates around what was the ancestry of the Neanderthals. Were they our ancestors? Were they another branch? We start to see creeping in, and again, this is early 20th century, really quite obviously racialized images, very dark skin. They're being made to look highly aggressive and quite clearly like Black people. So this is an aspect that cannot be forgotten. And you get sort of the beginning of sculptural representation of Neanderthal at this point, and this is in the 1930s. Neanderthals still, they're looking kind of more human-like, doing some sort of things with tools, but they just look depressed. They don't look like they're happy to exist. If we zoom forward in time, where we are today, many decades on, after vast amounts of new archaeological discoveries and interpretations, which actually is a feedback cycle between what we find from the archaeology, which informs the illustrative ideas, but those ideas also then affect what we might be looking for in our archaeological interpretation. This is when we can see this 21st century sort of developing idea, 20th century, late 20th century, of the Neanderthals begin to look back at us. There begins to be, rather than a mind that is sort of just not really thinking, just existing in the world, these are minds that we can communicate with. And of course the genetic aspect is part of that, that once we realized that there had been direct interbreeding, that's only a decade ago that we had that confirmed. I think that has really transformed how the public thinks about Neanderthals, how that makes us feel about them, and also I think it has really shifted the way that artists feel able to engage with them as a subject that looks back at you. oops, I clicked my wrong arrow. There we go. And it's the same thing in sort of the way that they're represented in terms of what they do. So on the left there is a very early 1880s sort of Neanderthals running away from a terrifying mammoth. 20th century, 21st century, this is by Mauricio Anton. This Neanderthal is running towards us, and he looks like someone that is very impressive. You don't want to mess with him. He looks like he might be running to the mammoth to take the mammoth on instead of away from it. And also how things have shifted now. We've begun to allow Neanderthals to have relationships. Not just this idea of them looking back at us as the viewers and the relationships we know that we had with them in the past, but they have relations with each other that are meaningful, that are nuanced. This is a real shift in how they're presented. The whole issue of how women are presented in sort of prehistoric illustrations and reconstructions is a massive topic in itself. I won't sort of go into that, but suffice it to say, almost all of it until very recently was women on the left there. That's from the 1880s. In the background, if they're lucky, they have a face, usually associated with a child. Most of the time they're down on the ground, what's been called by Dan Gifford-Gonzalez as sort of the drudge of the skin work. Completely different in some more modern interpretations. Here is a woman on the right. You know, she's just doing her thing. She's above the male as well. That is very unusual, and it's refreshing. And also women are active. They do things. They have skills. You know, this is a real change. And I think to finish with, one of the things we also allow Neanderthals to do is be happy these days. You know, to have emotions that go beyond bare survival, and sort of the idea that those early sculptures we saw before, you know, they were basically just expecting to become extinct. This is a completely different vision of Neanderthals, and it fits with what we see in the archaeology, that yes, they disappear from the fossil record 40,000 years ago, but before that they were highly successful in many different environments, and we would expect them to have emotional lives that are complex, nuanced, and to also include happiness and joy, just as we see in our closest living primate relatives. Self-portraits, this is something that's interesting. Where do we fit in? That's me, obviously. You do see people taking selfies with Neanderthal reconstructions. And just to finish, what did I do in Kindred? I worked with an artist, Alison Atkin, to try and reimagine some of how we present Neanderthals. This includes focusing on children, groups, relations, interbreeding up there with the two hands, and also imagining one of the newly found burial sites, which is very interesting, from Shanidar, possible burial. And also, just to finish, Palaeoart, as an author, I included art, but also I'm trying to present the Neanderthals through other arts, including not just prose, but poetry. So this is one of the poems that's in Kindred. I wrote narrative fiction and poetry, and I think this is something we could also think, how does that mesh with visual imagery? And I think that's the end of my talk. I don't have another arrow.
Thank you so much, Becky, and raising brilliantly everything that we want to talk about this session in terms of presenting and representing them and how we think about them with art and with text. Please do, if you've got a question for Becky, please do put it into the chat. I'm going to try and hoover some of those up so that we can talk about them later. But now it's time to move on to the next presentation. This is actually a video presentation pre-recorded in advance, very relaxing for me as a chair, because I know that timekeeping will not be an issue. And it's excuse me, I ahead of myself. It's Trine next. Do excuse me. So we'll come to the video presentation in just a moment. My apologies. But first, Trine Kellberg Nielsen, who is joining us from Denmark, which is PhD in Paleolithic archaeology, specializing in Neanderthals. Currently, she's project leader on a large special exhibition on Neanderthals opening next week. And going on into August 2021 at Moesgaard Museum in Aarhus in Denmark. After that, she goes back to research as associate professor at Aarhus University. There she will start a large research project on the 1st of December, funded by the Danish Research Council through Sapere Aude funding program, focusing on northern Neanderthals, and it's called Neander Edge. Her own research focuses on establishing the most northern distribution of Neanderthals and how they adapted to changing conditions at the periphery of their range. She's also engaged as a board member of the European Society Society for the Study of Human Evolution, and she's a member of the INEL Cost Action funded by ERC Horizon 2020, and she's a member of the Danish Young Academy of Science. So it's a great pleasure to have her with us and to hand over to her now.
Thank you. I assume my microphone is also now turned on. Do let me know if it's not the case. So thank you for that introduction. What I want to talk to you today about is that here at Aarhus University, here at the Moesgaard Museum, we have an exhibition opening next week, actually on Tuesday, which is on Neanderthals. And I've been working primarily with research at the university before I engaged in this large dissemination project that this special exhibition is. It's a 900 square meters of a special exhibition. And it's entirely on Neanderthals and our story on Neanderthals. And this is something completely new in a Danish context. And this is actually something that's quite important maybe to stress here at the beginning, is that when you talk about the Danish audience, you have an audience that has not the same knowledge of Neanderthals that you would perhaps expect in Germany or in England, because actually it's not part of our historical teaching, because we don't have actual Neanderthal finds, at least not secure finds here in Denmark. So actually we're engaging with an audience that does not know so much about Neanderthals, and that's why it's extra important to really counter these prejudices and these myths that are still very much existing in the Danish popular culture on Neanderthals. The exhibition is the illustrations for the exhibition is made in collaboration with Tom Bjørklund, the artist that Becky also mentioned, and of course he's a kind of a sign of the times in a way, because he has really engaged in representing the prehistoric people, both from Neanderthals and also Homo sapiens and other periods, and he's being used quite a lot right now. So in a way, he really shows the new image of Neanderthals that has been emerging both from research, but definitely also in the popular culture, because as Becky also said, this new knowledge that we're actually part of the same human history, in the sense that we carry the Neanderthal DNA, and also that they mixed. This knowledge has really changed how we view Neanderthals. And we engaged with Tom Bjørklund, and he made some beautiful images for the exhibition specifically, but we also used some of the images that he had already produced for other things. And the photos that I want to show now is actually from the exhibition that has not opened yet. So there will be ladders and lifts in the photos, and that's just how it is, because it opens on Tuesday. But what I really want to show you is how we have chosen to disseminate and to present the Neanderthals. We have done so in portrait-wise in two ways. We engaged Tom Bjørklund to make some portraits that we then project on this surface, this stone, with a projector. So it's not per se a textile representation, but it's actually a projection that comes to life. So it has a media layer. It has very small animations, so that when you are walking around in this large room, and you think the images are standing still, but suddenly you realize that they're actually alive. It's not animation per se, but it's the hair moving, it's the hand moving a little bit in the action that they are doing. So it's something very subtle, and so that it does not become very comic, but instead really engages the audience with viewing actual living Neanderthals. And this is something that we really have tried to do in the exhibition, because stones and bones are very interesting if you're an archaeologist, and also perhaps for the audience. But what you really need to show is that Neanderthals were humans like us, and that they were engaging in all these activities that we would also expect that our ancestors did. So the portraits that Tom Bjørklund made for the stones are 6 pieces, 3 of them here and 3 on the next slide. And the podiums where the stones are put present various topics of Neanderthals, Neanderthal lifeways. And as you can see, the first image here is a young Neanderthal woman who's butchering a reindeer. In the middle, we have one of the reused images that Tom already produced previously, but which I really find an excellent image of an adult learning a small Neanderthal child how to hit the core with a hammerstone to make artifacts. And at the end, an image of a man engaging in putting a birch tar on a lithic tool. So the other three is a woman breastfeeding her child, and in the second, an elderly sick man being nursed by his group, and at the end you see a grandmother type individual who's surrounded by the children of the group, who's playing and being a little bit naughty with the pigments, and these images are then projected onto these stones, and then through the tiny animations, we want to really show these emotional connections that we want to have with the Neanderthals in the exhibition. And of course, they also in themselves refer to new research and new science and new knowledge about what we do know about Neanderthals and how they engage in a social group with each other, nursed sick individuals, and also how the life cycle of Neanderthals would potentially have been based on the newest scientific results from teeth, for example, and also in the second one, also how well adapted they were to their environment, and how they made more than just lithic tools, but also organic material, used that, and also had a wide dietary breadth. So these are some of the aspects that these portraits represent. Then later on in the exhibition, we have a different way of portraying the Neanderthals. Here we actually in this section we call it the meeting, but it's because it's the place in the exhibition where we want to talk about what we know and don't know about the last time of Neanderthals. So in the time that they were actually also engaging and meeting Homo sapiens, and also at the end goes extinct as a separate human type. And in this round circle that you see in the photo, this is a media projection that is in the middle. And in this media projection, we tell the story of this transition via images, visual images, but there's no human images on this surface. But it's a story that is told through speak. There's a voice telling you what you're looking at and what you're supposed to understand. But while you're sitting there in the circle, listening to the story in the middle and looking at the images, when you look up, you see first the row of other visitors in the exhibition, so the Homo sapiens who are there, but behind them will then be the Neanderthals that will join the Homo sapiens in this circle while you're listening to the story of how they might have met each other. And this is something that we have done quite purposely, because we want to really make it obvious to the audience that this is also about that the difference between us and Neanderthals have been highly reduced with the recent research. And the images themselves are made by Tom Björklund, and you see examples of them at the bottom of the PowerPoint. And they are extremely strong individuals. It's quite clear that these individuals are not to be messed with. They are powerful, they're skillful, they're really well adapted, and this is some of the things that we really wanted to show in the exhibition, so that people get a respect also for the deep history, and also for the many different humans who have been on the world before us, and also these images we're using the Tom Björklund images also publicly with the PR, and actually here we really engage in these prejudices and these myths that are so engaged, that is so present still in Danish popular culture, and the way we talk about Neanderthals and use Neanderthal as a word to say negative about other people. And here in the commercial part of the exhibition, we really try and counter these prejudices and these myths through the images, but also through the text that appears on the banner, saying that okay, they are not as unintelligent as was previously thought. They were also they were very well adapted, and all of these new ideas about Neanderthals. And also through the objects that we have on display, of course, we want to really show the large variation that we have and the knowledge that we have about Neanderthal technology through, for example, the original Lyringen spear, as you see here in the middle, which is one of the spears that has been found from the Eemian interglacial in association with a forest elephant or in a lake in Germany. We also have we also really want to show. Is it time? Oh, I have 9. Yeah, you're right. I have one more slide. We also really want to show that there were not many people in a large landscape, and this is something we do in the architecture of the exhibition. But all in all, the image of Neanderthals that we do wish to present really to the Danish and hopefully international audience, if they are allowed to travel to Denmark in these times, which we of course hope, is that we really want to show this large variation that there is among the Neanderthals, because this singular image that you see here is not representative, of course, at all. We really want to counter this idea of this brute savage. We also want to really show that they were skillful and capable, and also as reflections of ourselves, we want to show that there were differences, but there were also a lot of similarities. And we really hope to present in the text and in the exhibition some of all the uncertainties and discussions that are still present in research, because it's not black and white. We do not have all the answers. We don't know exactly what happened, but everything is being turned upside down right now as we speak through new archaeological discoveries. And that's what makes this topic so important to disseminate to the wider audience right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Trine, and thank you for giving us, for me at least, so nice to see pictures, if only pictures of a museum exhibition. I really hope to be able to go into a museum again one day soon. Okay, our final presentation today, pre-recorded, as I said before, by Robbie Bushe, who has exhibited his distinctive narrative drawings and paintings since 1990. And can be seen in public collections throughout the UK. He's won awards throughout his career, including the Guthrie Medal at the Royal Scottish Academy and the inaugural W. Gordon Smith Painting Prize in 2016. Born in Liverpool in 1964, he grew up in Aberdeenshire before graduating in painting at Edinburgh College of Art in 1990. And since then, he's successfully worked as both an artist and as an art lecturer in Aberdeen, Chichester, Kent, Oxford, and now back in Edinburgh. He was president of Visual Arts Scotland from 2013 to 16, and in 2017, he was elected as an academician, excuse me, I can never say that word, of the Royal Scottish Academy. Bushe's art straddles the use of research, daydreams, observation, and pictorial reconstruction. He invents characters within a cinematic context, involving himself in fake or reimagined mythology, often borrowed from and celebrating the tropes found in late 20th century science fiction, film, and TV. And he's here to talk to us about a project called NeoNeanderthals, in which he collaborated with the artist and anthropologist Dr. Jean Canizzo to create a multimedia exhibition of drawings, paintings, sculptures, and animations showing to critical success at the Royal Scottish Academy in 2019. His painting, The Neanderthal Futures Infirmary, is one of 67 works selected for the coveted John Moores Painting Prize to be exhibited at the Walker Gallery, Liverpool, in early 2021. So, Jack, perhaps we could play the video.
Hi, I'm Robbie Bushe, an artist and lecturer in Edinburgh. I am not a scientist, but this is how I reanimated the Neanderthals. Neanderthals is a creative collaboration between myself and artist and anthropologist Dr. Jean Kenitso. We took giant liberties with the science and culture left to us by Neanderthals. In particular, the discovery that we and Neanderthals had at some point interbred. Jean made fake artifacts, detritus and chimera, such as our wolf dog with an Ice Age survival kit, and Mammoth DNA genome to clone for de-extinction. I focused on the cloning process, such as DNA laboratories and cloning chambers, drawing upon years of too much horror and science fiction.
Oh, yes, yes. Yes? No. No. Yes, no. Yes. Yes, definitely. Yes, definitely. I don't cut my hair every day.
The ward of delusion for convalescing Neanderthals.
No, Jesus Christ,
And the provincial DNA harvester, which extracts human Neanderthal DNA while folks go about their daily business.
Should we contemplate Raphael's study as separate from the painting?
The Last Neanderthal is a time-travelling story of paintings and animations spanning over 60,000 years. 30,000 years ago, a solitary female, the last of her kind, lovingly tending her wild garden. Early modern humans pay their respects. She has only hours to live.
Well, she did.
A time capsule takes her thousands of years ahead, where early modern humans and Neanderthals interact, hunting and gathering, dancing and interbreeding. Present day, hidden under many forgotten or disused hospitals, are warrens of still functioning operating theatres, recovery rooms and laboratories. They have a single goal: to bring back the Neanderthals, who might have their own different ways to save our planet, and give us all a future.
The usual problems, cut and dry.
163. Come here. That one there was for a transformation of a Neanderthal into a pig.
30,000 years hence, and cloned Neanderthals are well established and form the majority. But some early modern humans reject there are a multiplicity of ways to be human, that diversity provides the chance of finding solutions to common problems, whether environmental, political, or social. Sound familiar? Now for the DNA extras, the making of. So this is my laboratory, an artist's studio, where all my ideas and images get thrown together and put on these large canvases. I know archaeologists love to peel back layers of time, so here's again is the painting Neanderthal Futures Infirmary, with all life forms taken out, so I can animate my stories on top of them. So here they are with the life forms put back in, and let's go back in time, maybe 4 days earlier, 7 hours before that, some weeks before, and so it goes on, days, weeks, maybe even into months, as we scroll back and dig deep, and a full 3 months before, we can see the initial scribblings of a late modern human. Not unlike these 64,000-year-old cave wall paintings from La Pasiega in northern Spain, believed to have been made by Neanderthals. So Jean and I journeyed through much research and imagery, and played with data, ideas, theories, and our imaginations to put on our show.
We have been sleeping for a very long time.
Thank you from the last of the modern humans. You can view all work, animations and writings at NeoNeanderthals.art.
Thanks very much for sending that in. Robbie is also live with us to respond to your questions. So if you have any, please do pop them into the chat there. I've been collecting a number of them from the first two presentations, and I hope very much that you'll keep them coming. We have a few minutes to get some discussion going now. And I wanted to start by inviting all of our panelists to turn their cameras and audio on, perhaps, and asking a question that Camilla in the chat asked to everybody, which is, she writes, I wanted to ask if you're aware of any examples of a relationship with a tree or with a plant world in general, not shown as background, but real relationships. Camilla says she's a designer recently researching the subject of human and non-human interaction. Of course, plant blindness is a real thing with paleoartistic reconstruction quite often, isn't it? So I wonder if any of you have an answer to that question, what plants are doing in our picture of the Neanderthals.
Okay, I'll give it that to Trine, because I know that she has birch trees in this exhibition and it is based in real archaeological context, so she can answer that one.
Well, I mean, this is one of the things that we actually wanted to include more. I mean, this whole, all this knowledge that we have about Neanderthal interacting with the vegetation in general. But yeah, we do have real birch and asp, which I don't remember the English word for right now, but the Danish word is asp. It's a similar looking tree, but it's also from the period known. This is what we could access here in the region for the exhibition. But since the question was specifically if we know of any visuals, I know of a photo, an illustration made also by Tom Björklund, who is of people who are digging in the soil to get roots, tubers. So this would be my only idea of that. But yeah, we really want to bring the nature into this exhibition, and also based, of course, on the knowledge that we have of the vegetation. But you're right that it's more often to get the visual representation of the meat, because it's just more present both in the archaeological record, but it's also more visually much more easy to represent. So I think this is part of why the bias is there and still is there, maybe even also in our exhibition, even though we've tried not to.
Thanks very much. Jade Martin, one of our PhD students at Birmingham, sent in several questions. For now, I'll ask the question that she sent into Robbie. Why is it, Robbie, that cloning was so important to you in this project?
Yes, thanks, Jade. I was just looking at that question and I was trying to think where it came from. And it may have been because in Edinburgh, at the Chambers Street Museum of Natural History, Dolly the sheep was exhibited there. And maybe that was a fascination. And I went in there when I was beginning this project, and Jean and I weren't together when we were first collaborating. She lives in Canada, and I was living in Edinburgh. We were doing cross correspondence kind of collaboration, And I thought I better go and see if there are any relics from Neanderthal times in Chambers Street Museum. And there was these skulls. I think Dolly the sheep was there. And my fascination with cheap Star Trek, Forbidden Planet style science fiction, there was more scope for bringing the Neanderthals into the present day and the future for my story, and to kind of examine the social political context that might bring up. I think that was the main reason. It was a science fiction trope that I wanted to explore more than anything else.
Thank you. This is a question that Chris Jarvis asked to Becky, but I think it's possible that all three of you might have something to say about it. It's a question about clothes. So during Becky's talk, Chris observed that most of those representations that you used there were still showing the Neanderthals naked. In Björklund, of course, we see them clothed quite heavily in some cases. Do you think, Chris writes, that this accurately represents them, or is nakedness still a trope that's being used to kind of portray them as beastly and primitive?
I think it's probably both, because when we talk about the Neanderthals, we need to remember that we're talking about many different groups who lived through 350,000 years, through multiple cycles of climate change, and across a vast geographic area. They're Western Eurasians, they are not Europeans, So what Neanderthals wore in one place and time may not be the same in another. So having said that, we know two things. One is that modelling based on their bodies and climates does suggest that during very cold periods, they would have needed some kind of quite decent body covering that's more than just like a loose flapping skin, that there would have had to be some level of tailoring. We also know from their own bodies that they were investing masses of time in using their mouths, probably to pull skin through their mouths, which is represented in some of the images that we've seen. And also we see on the stone tools, there's loads of micro polish that suggests that not only fresh skins were being cleaned, but also sometimes dry hides as well. So hide working is a massive thing that they were doing a lot of. The amount of clothing and what it looked like, we can't really say. But in terms of are they too naked still? I'm not sure, because I think it depends on where they are represented. These days, if you're talking about a snowy scene, I would be unhappy if a Neanderthal is running around with bare legs and just like a cape flapping around. I think we should really be representing them as wearing something reasonably tailored in very cold environments.
I can just add to that. I debated this one when I was creating my Neanderthal characters. Every time I did some drawings where they were clothed, they looked like the cliche of the caveman with the big stick. So I undressed them in the end, but I wanted to make them very dignified looking undressed, as opposed to these kind of crouched figures, because we now know that Neanderthals stood upright as we do. In the end, I opted to have most of mine, I think, naked for that reason, but trying to reinvent what nakedness is for Neanderthals.
I can add to that actually this is one of the questions that I've had the most times during making this exhibitions, both from the team here and everyone I've engaged with this. How were they dressed? Everyone wants to know, and my answer is I don't really know, but they were dressed. But so we also had to make actually new clothes for our Neanderthal on the stairs, made by the Kenneth brothers. So they made one of the sculptures for us, and they're all naked. So it's not just the Neanderthal; all of them are naked. But we wanted him to stand out for this exhibition, give him the culture that we know that he has. It's the individual from Spee, and so we're now tailor making. Some pants for him, but we're using our best knowledge, but it will be interpretation.
Thanks to all of you. Elsa Pancharoli's in the chat. Elsa, nice to see you there, or not see you, with a really good question about interpretations. And it was particularly clear in Becky's paper that inevitably our depictions of the Neanderthals are kind of infused with the prejudices of their time. So what do you think their modern interpretations, our present day vision of them, says about our society and the debates right now? It's a brilliant question, I think.
It is a good question. And I think I would say that I have an answer, but then I've just questioned my own answer because I suddenly thought, well, whose representations are we talking about? Are we talking about paleo artist representations, or are we talking about how anyone else who is artistic might wish to represent them? Because if you go on like DeviantArt, that massive website, there is lots and lots of work of people sort of visualizing Neanderthals for themselves, you know, with more or less access to archaeological information. But if we only think about modern official paleo art sort of work, it definitely has tended, as I said, towards a much more humanized view. And I think that, for me, I think that is because both as the archaeology has become much more nuanced and has sort of chipped away at many of the sort of barriers that we place between Neanderthals and ourselves in terms of capability and cognition. And also the genetics has shown that there is a direct legacy still living technically in us today. I think that for me, I think people want to know them, actually. I think that the whole sort of propensity to use them as a foil for us is still there. But I think people feel a new engagement with Neanderthals that has not previously existed.
If I may continue, I very much agree, but also this is actually a question that I've also been thinking a lot about while, you know, working on specifically this exhibition, because we are turning into a period where almost romanticizing Neanderthal life, you know, is a definite possibility, and we have to also address the things that are still tough in their lives, and the evidence that we do have of that, and also that there is, at the end at least, also massive bottlenecks in their genetic, so that we would have interbreeding and what that brings along with it. So of course it's not just, you know, they were happy and they did well, but it was also a lot of challenges, and this balance is something that we have to find. And I think it's so easy to get caught up in portraying all the positive sides of it, because we want to put ourselves away from the past racial, the imperialistic views of Neanderthals. But of course, we also have to reflect on our own way of reflecting Neanderthals, and I think people are doing that. But of course, it's easy to go to the other extreme, and yeah.
Thanks to both of you. We've got time for a couple more, I think. So I'm really interested in this question that Luba has asked in the chat about animals, Neanderthal and their relationships with other animals and how those relationships tend to be figured. Mammoths turn up a lot, right, in these things. Would you agree, Luba asked, that animals are represented as higher in status than Neanderthals, thus implying the lower beastly status of the Neanderthal? For instance, the dog in the image Becky portrayed as loyal and alert compared to a disheveled, primitive Neanderthal. How do you understand, from your different positions, those animal relationships?
I think it's very hard to sort of answer that question without one has to take oneself out of one's own cultural understanding of what Neanderthals are. And as I have actually tried to do this in the book, in sort of re-examining our understanding of what Neanderthals are doing with the dead, that there is evidence for butchery and processing, and that's been presented as, oh, they're being taken down to the level of their prey, and it's sort of somehow something awful to happen. Whereas if you don't see animals as just a resource, and they are entities with which one might have relations of a kind, which is exactly what you see in many indigenous hunter-gatherer populations, then that's a totally different starting perspective on what Neanderthals might have meant, have signified. In terms of how we present them in art, I have never seen any representations that would take that kind of view. It's almost always either the animals are antagonistic or as a resource. That's how I've never seen anything that is different to that, I don't think, except when it's parts of animals that are, you know, being claimed as like old jewelry or something, but that's not the living creature.
Well, Jean was very keen that I included mammoths and the wolf dog and hunting dogs as part of a symbiotic relationship with the Neanderthals, not as simply food. But I didn't examine that in any great deal, but just to simply demonstrate that they existed alongside, and they kind of traveled along with the Neanderthals as they went through time in my story, comically to a certain extent. But and the feathers in the Neanderthals' hair, just what Rebecca's talking about, was this notion that they clearly killed birds that were no use for eating, but they used them for decoration. So that was the reason for that.
I think I don't have anything to add.
Thank you, Trine. I think that those answers lead nicely into this question Oliver asked about the processes of reconstruction. And I think, the opportunity that we have on this panel is that we have from a kind of text and poetry perspective, from an artistic perspective, and from the perspective of a museum professional, we have this opportunity to talk about representation and reconstruction. So Oliver writes, how could we make the process of reconstruction that includes inevitably guesswork and ever-changing knowledge transparent to visitors and readers? Trine, I imagine you're the one with the most immediate answer to this question.
Well, I mean, it's a great question, because of course also the questions that I do get when people now take a walk in the not open yet exhibition is also, is this a portrait based specifically on a skull, or is it based specifically on a specific fossil, and can I then assume that the person looked exactly like this? For some reason, this is very important for people to know how to relate to the person or the individual, the portrait that they're looking at. And of course, the answer is that, I'm sorry, the light here is automatic. I cannot do anything about it. Is that, wait, I can do it while walking. So yeah, I mean, it's something that's really important for people to know. And I think this is something that we're also making quite clear when we do let people know that we're using an artist to make this representation. And of course, we're talking about skin color and eye color and hair. How would the hair have been? All of these aspects of physicality that will be purely guesswork, but in itself leaves an impression with the audience.
Thank you. Either of you, Becky or Robbie, very briefly.
In terms of sort of the question is asking, how can we make sort of the whole process, I think, did they say, in books as well? Yeah.
How can we portray them in a way that is honest to what we don't know, while still being a portrayal?
Well, I suppose, I mean, I can't really speak about the image construction, although I can actually, because the images in Kindred, I worked with Alison Atkin, who is actually an archaeologist as well as an artist, and the images there are my ideas for scenes that she made reality, and they're all rooted in the stuff that I discuss in the book. So they, for me, are sort of supported by the text of the book. But I think sometimes people don't want to see all the guts and the messiness behind the process as well. There is a tension there. Some people like that, some people don't.
I agree very much. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, that's all we've got time for, and I really apologise. We have more questions, but not quite time to get to them. I really appreciate the questions from everybody who came in, and particularly the time of our speakers, all of whom have books you can buy or exhibitions you can go and see, and those links have been made available on the side. There is another session starting in just a few moments on Palaeoart, so please do head on over to that if you've got a moment. In the meantime, this is the part where in a real talk I would invite you to thank the speakers with your applause. The speakers will have to imagine your applause on this particular occasion, but I'm sure it will be rapturous. I enjoyed that panel very much. Thank you so much for being here, all of you.
Also, thank you to the other speakers. I enjoyed it very much.
Yes, I can't wait to go to the exhibition.
Yeah, please come. Let me know what to do.
Me too.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.